I'm accused of being an immoderate. But in every crisis, Richard, there's an opportunity. And the challenge that we have together as faith leaders, as opinion leaders, as think tanks, is how do we deploy ourselves together in a formula that will capitalize on these opportunities within the window of time that we have to do it, so that we can leverage the voice of the moderates and address not only the causes that have fueled extremism, but enable the moderates to actually, as I said earlier, wage this war against the extremists. And that's what this whole situation represents. So if you zoom out from the trees and look at the shape of the forest for a minute, you can see that these patterns are happening, and that's the calculus that we are actually undergoing right now.
I will go to the 36,000 feet level in 1 minute, but let me just ask one more question about the ground view.
Sure.
Which is, sometimes in order to achieve the larger goals, one has to deal with immediate challenges.
Yes.
And you can call it a crisis, you can call it a challenge. It's conceivably an opportunity, as you yourself alluded to. Do you see the way of turning what has become a crisis over this community center into an opportunity, into something that would serve the purpose of building bridges rather than not?
Yes. And what has been so heartwarming to me has been the tidal wave of friends and new friends and people who have just been inundating us and saying, look, we're here to help you. The problem I have is like a person who's starting a football franchise and has 2,000 people want to be on the team. And I have to figure out how to identify the best 11 players to actually create the plays.
Well, I'll ask the question one last time, and then I'll move on to the larger level. Is compromise one of the tools you're prepared to deploy?
Everything is on the table.
Okay. I will let others see if they can. Something tells me you're not prepared. And I think, to be fair, since I've had some background in negotiations, there are times at which you don't necessarily want to get into great detail about what's potentially on the table, because that doesn't necessarily advance the cause of trying to reach a compromise. And obviously you've got to decide how much to be specific about and how much not to. That's obviously your call.
But as I wanted to say, we really are focused on solving it, and solving it in a way that will create the best possible outcome for all. That I give you my pledge.
I want to return to one of the larger issues you yourself mentioned in your statement today. And I'll quote from you. You said, "The battlefield today is not between Muslims and non-Muslims. It is between moderates of all the faith traditions and extremists of all the faith traditions." Now, on one level, I would grant that you're right, and there's that problem. But on another level, I think that skirts over a real issue. And again, to refer to something you said, 99+% of all Muslims are not terrorists. But when one looks at the world today, 99% of the world's most dangerous terrorists are Muslims.
Yes.
There is something that is wrong in contemporary Islam. You wrote this important book, which I have a copy of, about what's right with Islam. What about the question, what's wrong with Islam? Why is it that such a high percentage of today's most dangerous terrorists are Muslims? What is going wrong? What is wrong?
That's an important question, and I've tried to address it in my faith tradition. A number of things: political, socioeconomic, religious, perceptions shaped by the media, have all together created a witch's brew, which has let us look at the issue in this way. So what we have done in the Code of Initiative is to look at the underlying causes, unpack them, and create strategic projects that help to address these core issues. As the political dimensions are the most important. The Arab-Israeli crisis, which has gone on for so long, presence of our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, which has expanded the amount of terrorist acts. And by the way, we Muslims are the biggest victims of terrorism conducted by Muslims, etc. Then you have the religious issues. How do we go around the issue of separation of church and state? There's a history of the last century where we've had secular regimes really pushing religious voices away from the boardroom. These are among the issues that have fueled this crisis. The sense of alienation among Muslim minorities is more so in Europe than in this country, and the sense that we Muslims have to help each other, just like during the communist regime, American Jews were supportive of Soviet Jewry and their plight. There's a sense of a common bond. So we have to understand the physics, the dynamics of what's going on, and then engineer solutions. I think at this point we understand the science. We understood the science of how to go to the moon 3 centuries ago, but engineering the solution is what is needed right now. So we need to collectively engineer solutions and deploy them in order to address this issue.
Let's just talk for a minute then about solutions, so that's a word I tend to shy away from. What is it that Muslims can do so within the Muslim world radicals do not continue to have the upper hand? What is it that people who are of the Muslim faith, who are committed to moderation and tolerance and liberalism in the classic sense, what more is it that they can do to influence the trajectory of their fellow Muslims?
Addressed a number of issues, among them the issue of, politically, the issue of separation of religion and politics, and how do we address this issue. That's a very important issue in the Muslim world. But also, because we are in a globalized world today, what happens in the West has an impact upon what happens in the Muslim world. Look at the Danish cartoon crisis. Here was a crisis. It was a purely media-created crisis which resulted in a flare-up. And whenever a crisis occurs, Richard, there are always people and forces that have agendas. And they use it. It's like, the train is moving, they jump on the train because it helps them go to their destination. And we know that the Danish cartoon crisis was taken advantage of by certain people with certain agendas to push their agendas. So we have to understand, as I said, the political forces behind it, the religious forces behind it, the social forces behind it, and manage it. Because, as you say, it's not about fixing, it's about managing.
But there'll always be people with agendas. So there were people who took advantage, the Danish cartoonist, or if the pastor in Florida had gone ahead with his terrible threat to burn the Korans, there would have been people who would have exploited that. Where are the voices pushing back? What can we do to strengthen the voices in the hands of those who would say, yes, what has been said or done is awful, but this is not a justification, this is not a license for committing acts of violence against innocent people? What can we do to strengthen the hands of those people?
Well, we have to be strategic rather than reactive. We have to be proactive rather than... A lot of what I've seen has been reactive. Or we bring people in conferences which are important, to have conferences and talk about the issue. But that's like talking about what players in the field should do to win a game. In order to win the game, you have to be players in the field. We have to have strategies that we have formulated together and deploy those strategies. What is absent right now is strategic planning to actually combat that at a way sufficient to push back against that. Look, the threat of radical extremists from the Muslim world is not only a threat to Western governments, it is as much a threat to Muslim governments. It's as much a threat to Muslim societies. People in Pakistan are sick and tired of suicide bombers. People in Iraq are sick and tired of it. I remember going back to Egypt after a terrorist attack against some Swiss tourists. People in Egypt were mad and angry because tourism dried up. A lot of people were starving. It affected the economy. It impacts our societies. The misperception that Muslims are happy about, they're not. They're miserable. And they want something better. And we don't know how to give it to them. Radical extremists have hijacked our discourse. Imagine what would happen, Richard, if every time there was a suicide bombing, there was a news blackout. What would happen to the extremists? They love the fact that the media gives them this coverage. I don't know how to do it. I'm not saying that's a solution. But the fact of the matter is that the way things happen right now is that, we have a situation or a status quo where the extremists can hijack the agenda. And for all of our intelligence and smarts, we haven't figured out how to quiet them down.
I could go on, but I will show uncharacteristic restraint. So what I ask you to do is raise your hand, wait for a microphone, introduce yourself, and please limit yourself to one question and keep it extraordinarily short. Farouk?
Yes, I'm Farouk Athwari, also associated with Ethan Allen. I have had the pleasure of knowing the Imam for many years.
Fast question.
Well, I have made a suggestion that perhaps the time has come to take what I might call a freeze on this situation, perhaps to take a time out, to say that we're going to hold it up until you have these kind of discussions. You've done a good job here. And I think in the country, these kinds of discussions are needed, and an opportunity could take place that, in my 45 years, I've never seen the kind of a discourse that is taking place in this country. It is just amazing. And it is bad for America, it's certainly bad for Muslims. So there's an opportunity to take a breather and then to explain. And then I think we get an opportunity of having an opportunity for you to perhaps proceed in a better environment.
So what about the idea of a so-called timeout or a freeze?
Thank you, Farouk. Farouk is a dear friend, chairman of Ethan Allen. And our advisors have been looking at every option, including that.
Okay. I see a hand yes, ma'am. Please. I don't hear you.
I can't hear you.
I don't know. I'm talking it. There we go. June Cross from the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia. In fact, it was one of my students that first persuaded you to go into the pages of the New York Times last year.
Here, quick question.
You mentioned several times the analogy of the building a team together to create a coalition of moderates. What would your dream team look like? What are the characteristics of the dream team?
You, Richard Haas, and Farouk Athwari. On a more serious note, we need to have a combination. I wrote about this in my book. It needs to be a concerted, coordinated plan of actions on many fronts. We need opinion leaders. We need journalists. We need educators. We need politicians. We need religious leaders and faith leaders. We need academics and universities and schools and institutions, think tanks, to create plays, what I call, just like football analogy, create plays, because we do know that there are interests, there are agendas that other people have. We have to run blockage. We have to do all. I mean, football is the perfect analogy to this. We have to create first downs. We have to create, everybody's looking for a Hail Mary pass. It won't happen in this situation. We have to stay in the game, play in the game, and the opportunity which many people have seen in this crisis is that, like a football game where everybody's losing, all of a sudden the first down is caught and people are coming back into the stadium. So I think we do have certain opportunities here, and we are right now feverishly thinking of how to put together the structure that will enable us to deploy more people in such a discourse and move the ball forward towards, as Richard said, managing the crisis in a much better way, if not fixing it.
I like football as much as the next guy, but a Hail Mary pass is a metaphor too far. Mr. Arkin.
I'm sure that the father is here would like it.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You speak much of strategy, which means future planning. In the early days of your planning for this mosque in downtown New York, did you or your colleagues anticipate the crisis it might create?
No, we did not. And in fact, we were surprised because when the news became public, front page of New York Times last December, nobody objected.
If you had anticipated it as